On my flight to Scotland, my mom sent 31 texts telling me to cancel my $12,750 honeymoon and fly home to babysit my siblings or be disowned. The text from my mother arrived on my phone screen at 6:41 a.m. while I was waiting in the customs queue at Heathrow Airport, and the first 3 words caused my knees to buckle. Emergency family gathering. I saw my wife Harper's expression as she read over my shoulder. I watched her countenance morph from drowsy satisfaction to anxiety about something more serious. Anger or recognition? We had been married precisely 21 hours. We'd spent the previous 9 months preparing our vacation to Scotland. We saved $12,750 to finance the Highlands, distilleries, and castle accommodations. And my mother's next message, which arrived before I could digest the first, said, "Your sister Madison fractured her leg. Someone has to babysit the kids. You must return home today." Not, "Can you return home?" Not, "Is there any need?" As if I were an employee she could summon at any time. I'd been the oldest of 5 children for 29 years, but I'd been functioning as a third parent since the age of 10. That's when my mother returned to school for her master's degree in educational administration, which required evening classes 3 evenings a week and weekend study sessions that took up the entire Saturday. My father had a sports goods store, working retail hours on most weekends and during the Christmas season. Someone needed to monitor my younger siblings, Madison, who was 7 at the time. The twins Carter and Dylan were 5 years old, while baby Sienna was just 3. That person became me. I learned to make macaroni and cheese before I learned long division. I changed diapers while my pals played Little League. While my age group had sleepovers and went to the movies, I read bedtime stories and looked for monsters beneath mattresses. By the time I was 13, my responsibilities had shifted from basic childcare to effectively running the family. I went grocery shopping with a list my mother had set on the counter and cash she'd put in an envelope labeled food money. I made supper most evenings. Nothing extravagant, just spaghetti, tacos, and chicken nuggets, the type of food that a child could handle. I assisted with homework, managed sibling disagreements, and provided bandages and children's Tylenol. I remembered which youngster was allergic to strawberries and which one refused to eat their sandwich until it was chopped into triangles. My parents always commended me for being mature, reliable, and dependable. Teachers at school referred to me as an ancient soul. Neighbors believed I was wise beyond my age. No one ever questioned why a 13-year-old was performing the job of 2 adults, or why my parents appeared perfectly content to delegate their parenting responsibilities to their child. The practice remained unabated throughout middle and high school. I couldn't join the basketball team since practice lasted until 5:45 p.m., and someone had to collect the kids off the school bus at 3:05. Sienna had a dancing performance that night, and my parents had commitments they couldn't break. My mother had a meeting in Phoenix. My father had an inventory weekend at the store. I only attended one high school party since leaving the kids alone overnight was not an option, and my parents' notion of family time was for me to babysit while they went to dinner and watched a movie. I was admitted to Berkeley with a half scholarship, my ideal school, and my mother thought it was great but unrealistic. "We need you here," she replied, stirring her coffee at the kitchen table as if she were discussing the weather. "The children rely on you. Berkeley is really far away." So I went to stayed at home, traveled 35 minutes each way, worked part-time in a campus bookstore to save money, and returned home every afternoon to make sure the kids had food and got started on schoolwork. My mother had completed her master's degree by then and was working as a vice principal at the middle school, but her hours were never in line with the needs of the students. My father was still in the store, working weekends, and unreachable. At 23, I finished with a degree in civil engineering and was immediately hired by a mid-sized business that constructed municipal water systems. Good employment, fair compensation, and genuine career opportunities. I relocated to an apartment precisely 7 miles from my parents' house. 7 miles. That was the furthest I could psychologically rationalize going since someone had to be accessible for the kids. That's when I met Harper. She worked as a pediatric occupational therapist at the Children's Hospital. Sharp, humorous, and really insightful, which made me uneasy at first. We'd been dating for 4 weeks when she casually requested for Thai cuisine. "So, how frequently do your parents truly parent their own children?" The question hit like a blow. I had been telling her about postponing our dinner arrangements the night before since my mother asked me to keep the kids while she went to a retirement celebration. "They parent them," I explained defensively. "They're simply busy. It's easy for me to help." Harper had given me a long, probing gaze. You did not help out last night. You were a parent. There is a distinction. I did not have a response for it. Harper did not push at first, but just watched. I had to regularly cancel arrangements because my mother would call with some sort of emergency, which typically meant trouble. They saw me spend my weekends driving kids to soccer games and birthday celebrations while my parents attended their own social events. I saw my phone fill up with texts from my mother at all hours. Dylan needs poster board for an assignment due tomorrow. Can you pick up Sienna after gymnastics? I am running late. Carter left his trumpet at home. Can you bring it to the school? Always posed as queries but acting as mandates because if I answered no, I would forsake my siblings. I sincerely and strongly loved my siblings. They felt like my children in ways that were probably unhealthy but very genuine. When I proposed to Harper after 3 years of dating, she said yes right away, and then said seriously, "We need to talk about boundaries before we get married because I will not spend our marriage coming second to your parents' convenience." We spent months in premarital counseling with Dr. Elise Thornton, a licensed marriage and family therapist with 11 years of experience specializing in attachment and family systems. Dr. Thornton posed questions that made me sweat. When was the last time I said no to my parents? Never. Did I get paid for childcare? No. Have they ever thanked me? Not really. Did I recognize this as exploitation? The word hit me like a cold water. Exploitation. Not helpful. Not familial support. Exploitation. We set limits 5 months before the wedding. I informed my parents that I would no longer be available for regular childcare, but that I would be pleased to assist in true emergencies. Saturday soccer games and forgotten lunchboxes did not qualify. My mother sobbed real tears, rubbing her eyes with a tissue as if I had announced my death. "After everything we've done for you," she murmured, her voice cracking. "We reared you. We made a sacrifice for you. And now you are abandoning your family." The guilt trip was well executed, refined over years of experience. But Dr. Elise Thornton had prepared me for it. "You are not abandoning anyone," she had emphasized throughout our session. "You are creating age-appropriate boundaries. You are an adult son getting married, not an unpaid babysitter." My father's answer was colder and more caustic. "Okay," he responded when I described the new restrictions, "but don't expect us to bend over sideways if you need something someday." The connotation was apparent. The relationships in our family were transactional. I offered free work. They offered what exactly? Conditional affection and reluctant approbation. I tried not to think about it too much. The wedding occurred in April. A little ceremony with 85 guests at Harper's favorite botanical park. My parents came and smiled for photographs and made a toast about how delighted they were. My mother sobbed again during the ceremony, and I wanted to think it was genuine grief over her son's wedding, not performance art intended to make me feel bad. We scheduled the honeymoon for late August, when Harper's hospital schedule cleared and I could take time off work. Harper had dreamed of visiting Scotland since she was a child, fascinated with Outlander and ancient history. We had thoroughly investigated everything. Flights from LAX to London to Edinburgh, rental cars, small lodgings in the Highlands, distillery tours, and castles. We'd saved every cent by avoiding meals and entertainment, worked extra hours, and putting birthday and wedding gifts directly into the vacation fund. Total cost: $12,750 for 13 days. I told my parents about it 8 months in advance. 8 months. I gave them more than a half year to make alternate childcare arrangements, plan around my absence, and accept that my life did not revolve around their demands. My mother responded by nodding blankly and saying, "That's nice, honey," as if I'd told her I was considering trying a new coffee shop. There are no questions regarding the itinerary. There was little thrill about my first overseas vacation. There was no appreciation of how significant this was to me. Just little indifference, which should have been my first red flag. But I was stupid enough to assume that the limits we'd established were being followed, and that my parents had accepted that I was no longer their go-to childcare answer. Looking back, I can't believe I was that foolish. They'd spent 19 years teaching me to be accessible, to drop everything, and to put their wants ahead of my own. 5 months of treatment would not be enough to remove such brainwashing. The first signs of problems appeared 4 weeks before our trip. My mother called on a Sunday morning as Harper and I were preparing breakfast. "I need to talk to you about something," she stated in her serious administrator voice. Your father and I have received an invitation to a wedding in Portland on September 4th. We hoped you could watch the kids that weekend. September 4th fell right in the middle of our trip. We'd be in an essay to explore Loch Ness and see Court Castle. I quickly responded, I can't. I will be in Scotland. I informed you about this some months ago. A long pause. So, couldn't you postpone? Only a few days. We simply cannot miss this wedding. It is your father's cousin's daughter, and it would be impolite not to go. The audacity was amazing. They preferred that I postpone rather than cancel, like that was more logical. My honeymoon so they could attend a wedding for someone I'd only met twice in my life. Mom, we paid $12,750 for this vacation. The flights alone cost $4,200, and they were non-refundable. The hotels have been booked and paid for. I am not postponing my honeymoon. Her voice changed, taking on the pained tone that had always caused me to collapse. I just assumed family would come first. I had no idea we were such a hassle now that you are married. There it was. The allegation. The manipulation. Family comes first. Which in her vocabulary implied that your demands are irrelevant. Only ours do. I remained firm, which was tougher than it should have been. I told you that you would need to hire a babysitter or find another option. Harper and I are traveling to Scotland as scheduled. She hung up without saying goodbye. The quiet treatment began. No calls, messages, or answers. When I tried to contact the children, it took 6 days. She eventually texted. We discovered someone, a neighbor's daughter. She is charging us $240 for the weekend. I hope you have a wonderful trip. The subtle antagonistic remark about the expense was typical, especially considering they frequently spent more than that on their own date evenings and weekend trips. They had money for social activities but despised paying for childcare. The calculation only worked if my effort was worth $0. We left LAX at 10:55 p.m. on August 28 for an overnight trip to London, with a connection in Edinburgh. I notified my parents the precise dates, emailed them our itinerary, and let them know we'd be unavailable at times owing to travel and bad mobile coverage in the Highlands. My mother replied with a stern fine via SMS. My father had not replied at all. The quiet treatment persisted, and it was actually a comfort. No guilt trips, no last-minute pleas, and no fabricated crises. Harper and I boarded the plane, exhausted and excited, cuddled up in our economy seats, and finally relaxed for the first time in weeks. The flight arrived at Heathrow at 3:52 p.m. On August 29th, it is London time. We had a 2-hour stopover before connecting to Edinburgh. Time to have some dreadful airport cuisine, stretch our legs, and attempt to remain awake despite the jet lag. I turned off airplane mode on my phone while we waited at the gate, partly out of habit. It took around 45 seconds to connect to the international network. Then it began to vibrate repeatedly. The notification noises were continual, causing other passengers to look over with angry faces. My gut fell before I even looked at the screen, because I knew. Of course. I knew. I received 31 messages, 16 from my mother, 9 from my father, 4 from my sister Madison, and 3 from family friends I seldom interacted with. All sent in the 9 hours we'd spent crossing the Atlantic. All are marked urgent, and they all scream catastrophe in that manner that makes your chest constrict, even though you know intellectually that it's most likely contrived drama. I opened my mother's texts first. They were time-stamped beginning at 7:48 a.m. Pacific time, which would have corresponded to when our plane was over Greenland. Madison shattered her leg this morning and tumbled down the stairs. She's currently in surgery. This is serious. So where are you? We need you home right now. Then I can't believe you aren't responding amid a family emergency. Then your sister may have died, leaving you unreachable. My hands became shaky. Madison was now 22 years old, living at home while completing her nursing degree at the public university, and she was still a member of the household I had helped nurture. A broken leg was severe, painful, and undoubtedly frightening, but surgery seemed excessive unless it was a complicated fracture or many fractures. I wanted to call right away, but we were still in the terminal. Announcements blare as people surge by. Harper read over my shoulder, her face turning pale. "Oh no," she gasped. "Is she okay?" I didn't know yet. We discovered a calm nook beside a closed business. I phoned my mother. She answered the first ring. Eventually she snapped. "No hello." There was no awareness that I had been on a plane for 9 hours with no cell connection, just fury. Where have you been? Her voice was tight and piercing, but not filled with despair. Not the voice of someone whose daughter had just had emergency surgery. We were on an aircraft, I explained, trying to remain cool. What happened? Is Madison all right? What sort of surgery? My mother sighed deeply and dramatically. She slipped down the basement stairs this morning while hauling clothes down. The doctor stated that she shattered her tibia in 3 places. They had to put a rod in. She'll be non-weight-bearing for at least 7 weeks, possibly 9. I dialed the hospital's number on my phone, ready to talk with someone directly. Okay, that's quite serious. I'm so sad she's going through that. Is she out of surgery? Can I speak to her? My mother gave a disappointed sound. She's in rehab and extremely drugged. She is not available for phone calls. Then came the punchline, the true reason for the hurried texts. We need you to come home. Someone needs to keep the kids while we take care of Madison. Your father and I cannot handle anything alone. You need to cut your trip short and return today. There it was. Not Madison is dying and would like to see you. We do not require family help during a medical crisis, but we do need to come home and babysit since we have more essential things to accomplish. Carter and Dylan were now 19 years old, having finished their sophomore year at State. Sienna was 17 years old and a senior in high school. They were not little children who need regular care. They were almost grown-ups themselves. Mom, the twins are 19. They're old enough to care for themselves and assist Sienna. I'm not sure why you want me to travel home from Scotland on the first day of my honeymoon to babysit youngsters. Long, scary quiet. I can't believe you've gotten so selfish. Your sister recently underwent surgery, and you're concerned about your trip. There was the word again. Our vacation, not honeymoon, made it feel frivolous, optional, and something I could skip without consequences. This isn't a vacation, I said, my voice rising despite my best attempts. This is my honeymoon. We saved for several months. We paid $12,750 for this vacation. The flights are non-refundable. We just arrived 5 hours ago. Madison is going to be okay. A fractured leg is horrible, but it is not life-threatening. And the kids are teens, not toddlers. They don't need me there. My mother's voice became frigid. If you don't come home, you shouldn't bother returning to this household. You've chosen a vacation above your sister, your siblings who rely on you, and this family, and I'll make certain that everyone understands who you've become. The danger hovered in the air, familiar and unpleasant. Emotional blackmail had always been her chosen weapon, developed over decades of experience. I hope Madison heals quickly, I murmured, my voice wavering slightly. We'll check in tomorrow, but we won't be home early. We just arrived. I hung up before she could reply. Harper was looking at me with big eyes. She threatened to disown you, she replied slowly, because we did not cancel our honeymoon to babysit teens. Put that way, it sounded absurd. It was wild, but it was also the same dynamic I'd been stuck in for 19 years. My wants were irrelevant. My limits did not matter. My existence wasn't important, except as a resource for my parents to abuse. We boarded the aircraft to Edinburgh. The short trip was meant to allow us to regain our breath, reorganize, and begin our genuine honeymoon. Instead, I spent time looking at my phone, watching texts accumulate. My father texted, "Your mother is distraught. Madison is asking for you. The children are afraid. This is what you chose." We arrived in Edinburgh at 9:05 p.m. local time. We picked up our rental car, a little Nissan hatchback with right-side steering, which made my American head hurt. We drove 45 minutes to our first hotel, a renovated Victorian mansion in the old town with uneven flooring and a fireplace in the room. It should have been amazing, the start of all we had planned. Instead, I perched on the side of the bed and dialed Madison's mobile phone, desperate to hear from her personally that she was okay, and that this was not the 5-alarm situation my mother had described. She responded on the 4th ring, her voice muzzy and distant. "Hey," she said. "Mom claimed you were not coming home." "I'm in Scotland," I explained gently. "I am on my honeymoon. I'm really sorry about your leg. That sounds really uncomfortable. How do you feel?" She was silent for a moment, and I could hear the beep of hospital equipment in the background. "It sucks. The surgery hurt, and the painkillers make me feel strange, but I'm fine." The doctor described it as a clean break. The hardware appears to be in good condition. "I'll be on crutches for a while. but I should recover well. Relief washed over me. Clean break. Good prognosis. Not the medical catastrophe my mother had predicted. So why is Mom claiming that this is a family emergency that requires me to fly home? I inquired carefully. Madison sighed. She's freaking out because someone needs to help me get around, and it appears she can't handle that, let alone managing the household where Carter and Dylan are adults and Sienna is 17. I'm not sure why she acts like they're 7 years old. There it was. The truth. Simple but infuriating. My mother did not wish to parent. She wanted me to come home and resume my role as an unpaid caregiver so she wouldn't have to deal with her daughter's injury. Maddie, I'm not flying home, I explained. I apologize, but I gave them 8 months' notice about this trip. They had time to plan. This is my honeymoon. I know, she said, sounding tired. I also told Mom about it. I told her the twins could help me and I didn't need you to fly home from Scotland, but she's all about family obligations and how you've changed since you married. It is exhausting. We talked for a few more minutes, and I reassured her that I loved her and wanted to hear about her recovery. She insisted that I enjoy my trip and ignore our mother's dramatics. When we hung up, I felt slightly better. My sister was not dying. She didn't need me there. This was a manufactured crisis, as Dr. Elise Thornton had warned me to expect. But the texts kept coming. My mother, my father, and extended family members whom my parents had clearly requested as reinforcements. My Aunt Marjorie, I can't believe you would abandon your family like this. What is wrong with you? My Uncle Raymond, your mother is crying. Come home and fix it. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly voiced their concerns about my selfishness, cruelty, and complete lack of family values. The psychological assault was relentless. Every day, dozens of messages repeat the same themes. Bad son, brother, selfish husband, and family destroyer. Harper was watching me spiral. We were supposed to tour Edinburgh Castle, walk the Royal Mile, and drink whiskey in cozy pubs. Instead, I was glued to my phone, reading accusations and guilt trips, and my anxiety increased with each notification. Harper took my phone from me on our third day in Scotland, after I had spent 2 hours in our hotel room responding to family texts rather than hiking through the Highlands as planned. This had to stop, she stated firmly. They are ruining our honeymoon. You are letting them ruin our honeymoon. We need assistance. We discovered Dr. Maren Whitaker, a family systems therapist based in Portland who also offers telehealth sessions, via an online directory. She had 16 years of experience focusing on emotional abuse, parentification, and toxic family dynamics. We scheduled an emergency video call for that afternoon, sitting in our hotel room overlooking Edinburgh, as Dr. Whitaker listened to me explain 19 years of exploitation and the current crisis. She did not interrupt, instead taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. She finally explained that what your parents had done was known as parentification. It is a type of emotional abuse in which parents inappropriately delegate adult responsibilities to their children. You have been exploited since the age of 10. You gave up your childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood to raise their children, and now they're escalating because you finally set a boundary. She spoke with clinical detachment, stating facts rather than passing judgment. The emergency they've created, in which you must cancel your honeymoon to care for teenagers who do not require intensive care, is a control tactic. They're seeing if you'll break and revert to old habits. Flying monkeys refers to a family-wide attack in which relatives are recruited to harass you. It is deliberate abuse. Hearing a licensed professional with credentials describe this as abuse changed something in my brain. It wasn't just Harper being overprotective or me being overly sensitive. This was real, documented clinical abuse. Dr. Whitaker assigned me homework. Document everything, every text, voicemail, and guilt trip. She requested dates, times, and exact wording. If your parents escalate further, she warned, you may require legal representation. I want you to have evidence. I assumed she was being paranoid. I didn't realize how right she was. We spent 5 days in Edinburgh before driving north into the Highlands as planned. The scenery was breathtaking. Rolling green hills, ancient castles perched on cliffs, lochs as clear as glass. We visited Stirling Castle, drove through Glencoe, and stopped at small distilleries that produced single malt whiskey and copper stills. It should have been perfect, but my phone was constantly buzzing, sometimes with 60 messages per day. My mother's texts ranged from hurtful to aggressive to openly threatening. You're destroying the family. Everyone knows what you did. There will be consequences for this betrayal. On September 4th, 5 days into our trip, my mother sent a text that made my blood freeze. Because you have abandoned your responsibilities, we are filing a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services. The twins and Sienna are being neglected because you are not present to care for them properly. Enjoy Scotland while you can. I showed it to Harper, my hands shaking. Can she do that? I asked. Can she report me to the APS for not babysitting? Harper, who had spent years practicing pediatric medicine and dealing with bureaucratic nightmares, appeared skeptical. Adult Protective Services are for elderly or disabled adults who are abused or neglected. Your siblings are teenagers with no custody arrangements. I don't believe there is any mechanism for that complaint to stick. Dr. Whitaker was more direct in an emergency session held that evening from our hotel in Annecy. Your mother is bluffing, she stated flatly. She's attempting to scare you into returning home, but she's also creating a paper trail that could backfire spectacularly because she's effectively documenting that she can't parent her own children without the unpaid labor of her adult son. That will not look good if any agency actually investigates. She was correct about the bluff. No one from Adult Protective Services ever called, but the threat had been made, and it lingered in my stomach like poison. 3 days later, on September 7th, I received a call from an unknown Oregon number. I answered wearily, expecting a telemarketer or the wrong number. Instead, a professional male voice asked, "Is this Logan Pierce?" I confirm. "This is Troy Haldane with Child Protective Services. I'm calling because we received a concerning report about minors in your household." My brain stuttered at the words, "minors household." "I'm sorry," I said. "I have no minors in my household. I am on my honeymoon in Scotland." "Are you certain you have the right person?" Troy Haldane sounded puzzled. "The report identifies you as the primary caregiver for 3 minor siblings, Carter, Dylan and Sienna Pierce. It states that you abruptly stopped caring for the children without making alternative arrangements, putting them in danger." The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. "My mother filed that report," I stated, "and she lied. Carter and Dylan are 19 years old. They are adults. Sienna is 17, but she is with our parents, who are her legal guardians. I am their 29-year-old brother. I have no custody, guardianship, or legal responsibility over any of them. I am on my honeymoon with my wife." There was a prolonged pause. "Could you describe your relationship with your siblings and your role in the household?" Troy asked cautiously. So I told him everything. The parentification that began at the age of 10, the 19 years of unpaid childcare, the boundaries I set before getting married, the honeymoon we had planned for months, my mother's insistence that I cancel everything to babysit teenagers who did not require intensive care, and the escalating harassment and threats. Troy listened without interruption, and I could hear him typing notes. After I finished, he said something that changed everything. "Mr. Pierce, I want to be very clear about something. The report we received was filed by your mother. In an attempt to make you appear neglectful, she has made several concerning admissions about her own parenting." He explained that CPS would perform a home evaluation within 72 hours. They would interview the children, assess living conditions, and determine whether adequate care was being provided. "For the record," Troy stated, "you are not in any legal trouble. You're an adult sibling without a custody arrangement. Your mother's claim that you abandoned minor children is factually incorrect. 2 are adults, and 1 is in her legal custody, but her admission that she cannot adequately care for her children without your constant presence is deeply concerning." We hung up. I immediately contacted Dr. Marin Whitaker again. "CPS is investigating my parents," I said, "and they are still processing it because my mother attempted to report me for not babysitting." Dr. Whitaker was quiet for a moment before saying something that will stay with me. "Logan, if CPS finds problems, it is because they exist. Not because you failed to conceal them, but because your parents have been neglecting their children while using you as a cover. You've been so effective for so long that the system never noticed what was really going on beneath the surface." She was correct. I'd been the band-aid on a wound that would never heal. And now that I had pulled away, the infection was visible. CPS conducted a home visit on September 9th. I was not there. I was in a small hotel in the Highlands near Loch Ness, attempting to enjoy a distillery tour while my stomach churned with anxiety. Troy Haldane called me later with his findings. "Mr. Pierce, I wanted to give you an update personally. We made an unannounced home visit this morning at 9:40 a.m. We identified several areas of concern. He listed them in the careful, clinical manner that social workers use. The house was disorganized and dirty, with dishes stacked in the sink, overflowing laundry, and little fresh food in the refrigerator." Dylan answered the door because his parents were still sleeping at 9:40 a.m. on a Thursday. Sienna had missed 4 days of school that week with no documented reason or parental contact. Troy went on to say, "We interviewed each minor child individually. They all stated that you had previously been in charge of most household management, child care, and emotional support. They described feeling confused and overwhelmed by your absence because they were unsure how to handle basic tasks that your parents had never taught them. The 19-year-olds reported being expected to fill your role while receiving no guidance or support. Your 17-year-old sister expressed feeling abandoned by both you and your parents." His voice softened slightly. "To be clear, she stated that she understands you're on your honeymoon and believes your mother is being ridiculous, but she feels abandoned by your parents, who appear unable or unwilling to engage in parenting now that you're not there to manage everything." Troy stated that CPS was opening a case. "My parents would have to complete a parenting capacity assessment, attend mandatory family counseling, and show that they could meet their children's basic needs without relying on their adult son. If they do not comply, or if Sienna's situation deteriorates after the twins move out, as they have stated they intend to do, we will need to consider alternative placement for her." The weight of it settled on me. My absence revealed such profound parental inadequacy that the state stepped in, and my mother had caused it by attempting to weaponize CPS against me. My parents' calls stopped after the CPS visit. The silence was eerie and unsettling, but the flying monkeys increased. Family members I barely knew were calling Harper's workplace, attempting to have her fired for corrupting me and destroying our family. Someone wrote on my firm's Facebook page that I was an abusive brother who had abandoned his disabled sister. My mother had apparently launched a full-fledged public relations campaign, telling everyone who listened that I'd refused to help during a medical emergency, that I'd called CPS on them out of spite, and that I was a monster who prioritized money and vacations over family. The lies were so prevalent and confidently delivered that some people believed them. Dr. Whitaker predicted this. "When you stop enabling dysfunction, the dysfunctional people will rewrite history and paint you as the villain," she had warned. Because admitting that they are the problem would necessitate self-reflection and change, which they are incapable of. "It is easier to blame you." I knew she was correct intellectually, but reading messages from cousins and aunts calling me evil, seeing my name dragged through the mud on social media, and having my reputation shredded by people who didn't know the truth, hurt in ways I wasn't expecting. On September 11th, 5 days before our scheduled flight home, I received an email from an attorney named Daniel Cross of Cross Family Law Group. The subject line read, "Legal consultation of Pierce family harassment case." He stated that he specialized in family law, specifically parental alienation, exploitation, and harassment. Dr. Whitaker had referred him to me because he believed I might need legal representation due to my parents' escalating behavior. "I've reviewed the documentation Dr. Whitaker forwarded with your permission," he said. "You have a compelling case for harassment, defamation, and possible parental exploitation. I'd like to discuss your options during a free consultation." We had that consultation at a pub in a small Highland village. Harper and I huddled around my phone at a corner table as Daniel Cross explained our legal options in simple, straightforward language. "Bottom line," he stated, "your parents have no legal right to your time, money, or labor. You are not responsible for their children. You never were. Any suggestion that you have a legal obligation to provide childcare is completely false." He explained that the defamation, which involved telling people I was abusive, neglectful, and cruel, could potentially be actionable if it harmed my professional reputation, though those cases were difficult to prove. The harassment campaign through third parties, which involved family members flooding my phone and contacting my workplace, could support a restraining order. "I recommend documenting everything, which you already do," Daniel said. "Every message, call, and social media post. If you want to pursue a cease and desist letter, I can write one. It would formally notify your parents to stop contacting you directly, or through intermediaries, making false statements about you, and leaving you alone. It is not legally enforceable like a restraining order, but it establishes a paper trail and demonstrates your seriousness. When most people realize there are actual legal consequences, they usually back down." Harper and I decided to have the letter drafted, We decided whether to send it after we returned home and could assess the situation face to face. But just having an attorney, someone with legal expertise on our side, made me feel less powerless against the onslaught. We ended our honeymoon. We visited more castles, drank more whiskey, and hiked through breathtaking landscapes that did not seem real. But every moment was clouded by my phone buzzing with abuse, the knowledge that my family was imploding while I was an ocean away, and the creeping guilt that perhaps I should have just returned home. We flew back on September 12th, landing in Los Angeles at 6:33 p.m. After 14 hours in the air, I turned off my phone's airplane mode and braced for the usual avalanche. Instead, I received a single message from an unknown number. "Hello, it's Carter. I got a burner phone so Mom can't monitor this. Can we please talk?" I called him from the baggage claim. He responded immediately, his voice tight and strained. "Are you back?" he asked. I said, "Just landed." "What's happening? Are you okay?" Carter remained quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice crackled. "Mom and Dad are informing everyone that you called CPS to destroy the family. They claim you made everything up to punish them. Aunt Marjorie and Uncle Raymond were here yesterday, and it was like an intervention about what a terrible person you've become." He paused. "Dylan and I know we've been trying to stay together since you left, and it's been a nightmare. Mom barely functions. Dad works before zoning out in front of the television. Sienna is struggling, and no one is helping her. The CPS lady was here, and she should have come years ago. But Mom is acting as if you orchestrated this." "I didn't call CPS," I explained carefully. "Mom called them herself, attempting to get me into trouble. However, when they investigated, they discovered real problems. That is not my fault, Carter. That is on Mom and Dad for failing to parent without my help." He made a sound that could have been either a laugh or a sob. "I understand. Dylan knows. We are not stupid. We've been witnessing this dysfunction our entire lives. You leaving has made it impossible to ignore, and we're done. Dylan and I are moving into an apartment together in 6 weeks. We have already signed the lease. We can't do it anymore." His voice was full of relief, guilt, and exhaustion. My 19-year-old brother sounded like he had aged a decade in 2 weeks. "I'm sorry you're stuck with this," I said, meaning it. "But you're making the right decision. You cannot give up your life to parent your parents. They must figure it out themselves." We talked for another 25 minutes. Me and the twin I'd helped raise, whom I'd taught to ride a bike, assisted with math homework, and counseled through breakups. He talked to me about the apartment, his plans, and his fear of leaving Sienna behind. I assured him that Sienna would be fine, that CPS was monitoring the situation, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let the system work. The next day, Harper and I met with Daniel Cross at his downtown Portland office. He was older than I expected, possibly in his early 60s, with gray hair and the calm professionalism that would have cost clients a lot of money. We sat in his conference room and reviewed everything: the texts, the voicemails, the social media attacks, the CPS report, the fake emergency, the harassment campaign. Daniel took detailed notes, occasionally asking questions. When we were finished, he sat back and folded his hands. "This is one of the clearest cases of parental exploitation and subsequent retaliation I've encountered." He said, "You have extensive documentation. Dr. Whitaker's assessment provides expert validation. The CPS investigation corroborates your account. If your parents attempt any legal action against you, which they won't because they'd lose immediately, we can shut it down instantly." "Can they actually sue me for anything?" I asked, because at this point I didn't know what was possible. Daniel shook his head. "They could file a frivolous lawsuit. Sure, anyone can sue anyone, but they have no standing. You have no legal obligation to provide childcare for siblings. The concept doesn't exist in law. If anything, you'd have stronger grounds to sue them. 19 years of unpaid labor, lost educational opportunities, emotional damages. I don't recommend that route because family litigation is expensive and traumatic, but you'd have a viable case." He slid a document across the table. "This is the cease and desist letter. If you authorize it, I'll have it delivered tomorrow." The letter was formal and unambiguous. My parents were to cease all direct contact with me or Harper. Stop recruiting third parties to contact or harass us. Stop making false statements about us to family members or on social media. And cease all attempts to hold me responsible for childcare or financial support of my siblings. Failure to comply would result in legal action, including restraining orders and potential defamation suits. It was harsh. It felt necessary. Harper and I signed the authorization. Daniel promised to handle delivery and follow-up. Fair warning, he said as we left. People like your parents tend to either back down completely or escalate dramatically when served legal papers. There's rarely middle ground. Be prepared for either response. The cease and desist letter was delivered on September 18 at 3:12 p.m. According to the courier's tracking, my mother called 22 minutes later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that was 3 minutes of hysteria, screaming, crying, accusations so garbled I could only catch fragments. Ungrateful lawyer destroying the family. Never forgive. My father called next. When I answered, his voice was cold and distant. So this is what we've come to? You're threatening us with lawyers because we asked for help with your own family. The reframing was masterful. Demanding I cancel my honeymoon had become asking for help. And 19 years of exploitation had vanished entirely from the narrative. Dad, you didn't ask for help. You demanded I cancel my honeymoon to babysit teenagers. When I said no, Mom faked a medical emergency severity, weaponized my siblings against me, recruited extended family to harass us, and then accidentally got CPS called on herself. That's not asking for help. That's abuse. Long silence. Then if that's your perspective, I don't think we have anything more to discuss. He hung up. That was the last direct contact I had with either parent. The flying monkeys persisted for a few more weeks, but Daniel sent cease and desist letters to the most aggressive ones, and the messages gradually stopped. My parents had apparently decided that complete estrangement was preferable to accountability or change. The CPS case continued for 5 months. Troy Haldane updated me periodically. My parents had completed 2 parenting assessments. Both scored poorly on measures of emotional availability, child engagement, and understanding of developmental needs. They attended 4 sessions of mandatory family counseling, then stopped showing up, claiming the therapist was biased and didn't understand their family. The house conditions had improved marginally, mostly because Carter and Dylan had been doing cleaning and cooking before they moved out. Sienna was back in school consistently, but her grades had dropped, and she'd told her school counselor she felt emotionally neglected at home. The issue is that your parents are barely meeting minimum standards, Troy explained in one call. They're not abusive in ways that would justify immediate removal, but they are profoundly inadequate parents. Your sister essentially parents herself, gets herself to school, makes her own meals, manages her own schedule. Your parents provide a house and financial support, but almost no emotional engagement or practical guidance. He sounded frustrated. Unfortunately, inadequate parenting isn't usually grounds for removal unless it causes demonstrable harm, but we're monitoring closely, especially now that the twins have moved out and your sister has lost her buffer. In January, 4 months after we'd returned from Scotland, Carter called me with news. Madison is moving out, he said. She found a job at a hospital in Seattle, and she's transferring to finish her nursing degree up there. She's leaving in February. My first thought was relief that Madison was getting out, followed immediately by worry about Sienna. What about Sienna? I asked. Carter was quiet. She's counting down the days until she turns 18 in May. She's already been accepted to state, and she's planning to live in the dorms. 5 months and she's out. She just has to survive until then. Survive. The word hit hard. My baby sister, the 3-year-old I'd helped raise, now having to survive in her own parents' house until she could legally escape. Is she safe? I asked. Carter sighed. Physically, yeah, but emotionally? Mom and Dad barely talk to her. They're like roommates who ignore her. She eats dinner alone in her room most nights. When CPS came to check on things last month, she told them everything was fine because she's so close to aging out that she doesn't want to risk getting put in foster care. She'd rather be lonely than in the system. It made sense, but it broke my heart. In March, I got a call from Sienna herself. We hadn't talked much since I'd been back. A few short texts, nothing substantial. But now, she called, her voice small and uncertain. Hey, she said. I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else. I got into state. Full-ride academic scholarship. I'm moving into the dorms in August. Pride flooded through me, mixed with relief. Sienna, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. A full ride is amazing. She laughed, but it sounded sad. I basically raised myself this year. Did all my college apps alone, Wrote my essays alone. Figured out financial aid alone. Mom and Dad didn't help with any of it. They didn't even ask. We talked for over an hour, my sister and I, about her plans and her fears and her hope for a future where she didn't have to parent herself. She told me she'd been in therapy through her school counselor, working through the realization that our parents' neglect wasn't normal or acceptable. She said she understood why I'd left, why I'd set boundaries, why I couldn't keep sacrificing my life for their dysfunction. I don't blame you, she said quietly. I'm going to do the same thing once I'm out. I'm going to build my own life, and they can figure out how to function without using their kids as unpaid labor. The CPS case closed in May, right before Sienna's 18th birthday. Troy called to let me know. We're closing the case since all the children are now adults, he said. For what it's worth, I want you to know that you didn't cause this situation. Your parents did. You just stopped enabling them to hide their inadequacy. Your siblings are all going to be okay. They're smart, resilient, and getting out. That's the best outcome we could have hoped for. He paused. And Mr. Pierce, what you did? Setting boundaries, protecting your marriage, refusing to sacrifice yourself. That took real courage. Your siblings learned from watching you that it's possible to choose yourself. That's a gift. My parents still haven't spoken to me. It's been 20 months since the honeymoon, since the boundary that broke our family. I've seen them 4 times in that period. 3 times at a distance at family events where we stayed on opposite sides of the room. Twice at the grocery store where my mother literally turned her cart around and left when she saw me. They look older, smaller, diminished somehow. My mother's hair has gone almost completely gray. My father has developed a stoop. They look like ordinary aging people who made catastrophic choices and paid devastating prices. Sometimes I feel sorry for them. Mostly I feel nothing. Madison is thriving in Seattle. Carter and Dylan share an apartment and are doing well at State. Sienna moved into the dorms in August and calls me regularly with updates about classes, friends, her newfound independence. She told me recently that she barely talks to our parents. They call occasionally, but the conversations are stilted and brief. They don't know how to relate to me as a person. She said they only knew how to relate to me as someone they could use. Now that I'm not available for that, we have nothing. It's sad, but it's also reality. Harper and I just celebrated our 3rd anniversary. We took a long weekend to Cannon Beach, stayed at a small inn, walked on the shore, ate fresh seafood, and actually relaxed. No emergencies, no guilt trips, no manufactured crises. It was quiet and simple and exactly what our honeymoon should have been. On our anniversary night, watching the sunset over the Pacific, Harper asked if I regretted how everything had played out. You lost your parents essentially, she said softly. That's not nothing. Do you wish you'd handled it differently? I thought about it. Really thought about it. About Carter's exhausted voice talking about surviving our parents' house. About Sienna doing her college applications alone. About 19 years of my life spent parenting children who weren't mine. About the honeymoon my mother tried to steal. No, I finally said. I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my parents chose control and pride over relationship. I regret that my siblings got hurt. But I don't regret protecting our marriage and choosing our life together. Because if I'd given in, if I'd flown home from Scotland and resumed my role, it never would have stopped. They would have owned me forever. Harper squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, she said. I know that might sound condescending, but I mean it. You chose yourself. You chose us. And you gave your siblings permission to do the same. We sat in silence, watching the sun sink into the ocean, and I felt something I hadn't felt since before the honeymoon. Peace. Real, deep, uncomplicated peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of freedom. Freedom from obligation, exploitation, and the crushing burden of other people's refusal to mature. Sienna sent me a letter 2 weeks ago. Not a text or email, but a real handwritten letter in the mail. Dear Logan, it began. I've been thinking a lot about what happened to Mom and Dad during the honeymoon. I was confused and angry at first. But now I get it. You were not abandoning us. You showed us that it is possible to set boundaries. Watching you stand up to them. Choosing your own life despite everyone accusing you of being selfish. That taught me something I needed to know. That my worth does not depend on how useful I am to others. that I am free to want things for myself. Thank you for that. I hope you and Harper are happy. You deserve to be happy after everything you've given up for us. Love, Sienna. I called her in the evening. We discussed school, her psychology major, and her future plans to work with children from dysfunctional families. She sounded light, unburdened, and free in ways she had never done growing up. At the end of the call, she said, "Hi Logan, I am so glad you went to Scotland. I am glad you did not let them ruin your honeymoon. You deserved the trip." My throat tightened. You deserve to choose yourself. Thank you, Sienna. That means a lot. We hung up. I sat in our living room in the house Harper and I purchased last year, and I realized that this quiet evening with my wife, this freedom to build our own life, the absence of constant crisis and manipulation, was worth every painful consequence. My parents expected me to cancel my honeymoon to look after my siblings. When I refused, they attempted to destroy me, staged emergencies, weaponized my siblings, recruited flying monkeys, threatened legal action, and accidentally imposed CPS on themselves. They lost custody of their children's emotional well-being, lost relationships with all of their children except through formal politeness, lost their reputation in our extended family, lost their oldest son permanently, and, according to relatives I still speak with, they continue to blame me for everything, telling anyone who will listen that I am a vindictive monster who destroyed our family out of selfishness. Perhaps some people believe them. I don't care anymore because I know what actually happened. Therapy notes, CPS reports, legal files, and my siblings' testimonies all bear witness to this. The truth is devastatingly simple. I wasn't supposed to be their parent. I was supposed to be their son, brother, and family member, with proper boundaries and mutual respect. When I finally stopped being their unpaid servant, the dysfunction they had created through my exploitation collapsed. That is not my failure. That is theirs. And I am free. Finally, complete and permanent freedom.